Good morning, friends. Welcome back to the Monday Study Group. I'm glad you are a part of this study. We need everybody to make sense of this book, and it's a struggle. In fact, a couple of the commentaries said that this chapter, chapter 7, is the most difficult one in the whole book. It doesn't hang together very well. Parts of it seem like a collection of sayings, unrelated maybe to what came before and what went after, but there are groupings that seem to be uh, alike, roughly on the same topic, and not easy to understand. And Hebrew is like that. The semantic range of any Hebrew word is pretty broad, and so just because a word is there in the Hebrew text doesn't mean that it's easy for the translators to make sense of it in its relationship to other words in the sentence. So don't be surprised if you're using multiple translations and they don't agree with each other. We'll see some examples of that in the study of chapter 7. So be patient with your own understanding, and recognize also that you may be mirroring the impatience and frustration of the author of Ecclesiastes, Koheleth, as we call him, or the preacher or the teacher, because he seems frustrated also. And we'll see that again in this chapter. So let's begin with prayer. We need your help, God, and we thank you for it. We thank you for your grace and mercy and love and forgiveness and faithfulness, and all the other ways you relate to us and help us in our daily lives. Bless and guide us in this study. May we humble our minds before you and receive what's here, and help us to sort it out well in the light of all the other good things that you have taught us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, so chapter 7 begins with a section of some things are better than other things. Now, Ecclesiastes has been frustrated to find what is absolutely good, and he can't find it. He can't find anything that's absolutely good, but some things are better than other things, and so we get at least 3 examples here of better. And that's a technique, a rhetorical technique that the wisdom school used in trying to sort out what the best way to live was. So they would say that while they don't know the final answer to the meaning of life, they have discovered that some things are better than others. And of course, you have too in your life. You could write a good part of this book and give advice to people based on your life experience, that some things are better than others. You may think that they're just commonplace, that everybody knows that, but when you look at how people live, it doesn't seem that we always live in the light of what we know is better or best. All right, chapter 7, a good name is better than precious ointment. I think that's a way of saying that better is that which is about character, a good name, than about anything in our external appearance. We can look good, we can be handsome or beautiful, but if we don't have a good character, a good name, a good reputation, what good is that? We should not judge by outward appearance, but by the heart. And Ecclesiastes agrees with that. Remember the story of Samuel, the prophet Samuel, trying to find the one whom God had chosen to be the king of Israel. And he thought it would be one of the sons of Jesse that was strong and powerful and a good worker and a farmer and somebody who had good reputation, outward appearance maybe, and had gone through all the sons of Jesse. And then he said, well, yeah, there's one little kid left out there taking care of the sheep, but he's not the one that you probably want. And they bring David in, and of course, David is the one who, it says, was after God's own heart. That he really cared about the things of God. And so that was the one that was chosen, not so much on the basis of his age or strength or physical ability, but on the basis of his heart or character. That's what we have here too. A good name is better than any kind of outward ointment or appearance. Um, and in fact, our author then goes on to have this little theme in the first few verses about that the day of death is better than the day of birth. Well, we've seen that already in Ecclesiastes, but I think there's a new take on it here. Uh, the day of death is better than the day of birth because the fact that you know you are going to die someday means that you have to make good choices about your life in all the days you have left. If you thought you were going to live forever, maybe you could do whatever you wanted. But here, he says the fact that we all die, the fact that there is a day of death and a house of mourning, that means that we will all come to an end. And so that knowledge makes us wiser about how we should live now in the days and hours and months that we have left. I think that's his perspective, that death is positive in the sense, excuse me, in the sense that it can, if laid to heart, as he puts it in verse 2, if it's laid to heart, then it can produce wisdom and help us to live better in the days that we have left. How best can we serve in the days that we have left? And we can all ask that, no matter how we live, whether our careers are over and we're now in retirement, but there are things that we can do as volunteers that can make other people's lives better in whatever days we have left. We want to use them well and not waste our time. But we also, he says, in other places, want to enjoy the lives that we've been given, and that too is a gift of God. All right. In that sense also then, sorrow is better than laughter because you don't learn anything in the house of mirth, in the house of feasting, in the house of carousing, as one of the translations puts it. You don't learn anything there. So you can learn more from sorrow than laughter. You can learn more from the negative things that happen to you than the positive things that happen to you. And that's certainly been true in my life. I've learned more from the things I've done wrong and that have not turned out well, the mistakes that I've made, than I've learned from things that went well and were successful and that people commended you for. But those things were not a cause of great learning. So the heart of the wise then is in the house of mourning. There's more to learn there. The heart of the fools is in the house of mirth. Verse 4. Again, I think he's valuing wisdom and what can be learned from mourning and the negative things that happen to us. Somebody in class said today that he's not a happy person, and I tend to agree with that, of course. There's no sense here that Ecclesiastes Koheleth is a happy person, but he's determined to learn from his search for wisdom. And so this is a part of what he's learned, that it's better to hear the rebuke, the negative word of a wise person than the beautiful song of a fool. Again, you learn more about the meaning of life from the rebuke, the criticism of a person who's wise than you do from happy words, happy notes from somebody who's simply foolish. Of course, most of us are a combination of wise and foolish. Nobody's absolutely a fool, and nobody is absolutely wise. He'll talk about that toward the end of our passage too. Hardly any of the commentators know for sure how to translate verse 6. The NRSV says, "The crackling of thorns under a part under a pot, for the crackling of thorns under a pot is like, or so is, the laughter of fools. It appears to mean something like the noise that kindling makes. Thorns that were used for kindling to start a fire might crackle and pop, and that noise is like the noise that fools make. The noise or laughter, the ha ha ha, of meaningless laughter of fools is like the crackling of thorns under a pot. This also is vanity. So verse 7, though, is a caution. As I read verse 7 says that it's possible that even a wise person can be made foolish by extortion or oppression that might cause the wise to act foolishly. Surely oppression makes the wise foolish. That is, somebody can force a wise person to do something that's unwise or foolish. And that might be, in fact, a bribe that corrupts the wise person from doing what is right. You could be offered a bribe for not speaking out against injustice, or for avoiding a testimony that, not giving a testimony that might set someone free who is not responsible for something that happened that was wrong. You take a bribe because it immediately benefits you, but in the long run you do an injustice or cause someone else to suffer, because the briber is guilty and does not want to take responsibility for their action. Even a wise person can be corrupted, he's saying. So verse 8 is another wisdom saying, and it's a wisdom saying that you could find in Plato. Judge nothing before the end of its time. Better is the end of something than a beginning. The patient spirit that waits to see how something will turn out is better than the proud person who thinks they know what the meaning of the situation is, but their pride blinds them to the truth of something. They make a premature judgment before they see how something turns out. He's saying that you can judge something much more accurately by the whole picture, by how it ends, not just by how something begins. It might begin well, but it might be a waste of resources at the beginning that results in not being able to carry through. We've got, you see them all the time where you live too. There are buildings that are put up and half finished, and the resources simply, for whatever reason, were not available to finish the building, and so there it stands. The beginning looked really good, like this was going to be a beautiful 2-story house with a sloping roof and places for windows that looked over the field or the sound, and it sits there, and it sits there, and it sits there, and finally the wood begins to decay, and the wind comes and blows parts of the plywood off the top of the roof, and the end is not good. But you may have been hopeful for it at the beginning. Better is the end of a thing so that you see how it turns out than being proud about the beginning. Be patient. See the whole thing through. If you need to judge something, judge it not by its cover, we say, but by the whole book, by the message maybe that's in the book. So that spirit of patience and waiting to see the end of the thing is carried through in verse 9. Don't be quick to be angry. Well, James says the same thing. Not to be slow to anger, slow to wrath, because the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God, James says. And so here our author says the same thing. Do not be quick to anger. Anger means that you're foolish. Who has anger? Well, fools are angry all the time. They are angry about this and angry about that, and they aren't patient. They aren't seeking wisdom. He says, don't be quickly angered. Don't be quick to anger. And also, don't say, oh, the good old days were better than the days we have now. Every time has its trials. Every time has its negative things. You probably have forgotten. If you're fortunate, you've forgotten all the bad things that happened in the good old days, and you only are remembering that which brought you love and peace and joy, and that would be a good thing. But also, the present can produce love, peace, and joy for us, and provide happiness. So he's saying, don't go walking around saying that the former days were better than these days. It's not from wisdom that you ask this or say this. So he's an advocate for wisdom. But wisdom is one of those things that's better than foolishness. They're not absolutes, though, are they? That's one of the problems, I think, in reading Ecclesiastes, that sometimes things are painted rather black and white. I have the same problem reading Proverbs or the Psalms, where the author seems to say there is absolute goodness and absolute evil, or absolute wisdom and absolute foolishness. And in my experience, and yours probably too, most people are a mix of wise and foolish. They're wise about some things and foolish in other ways. They may be really good people, but they also have faults and weaknesses. And even the best persons may well have secrets or clay feet, as we sometimes say. I think doesn't that come from Daniel and the statue that had clay feet, even though it looked to be strong and powerful and golden and so forth, but it had clay feet and it crumbled. This is partly what our author is saying. Wisdom is good. It's as good as an inheritance, and it is an advantage to those who live. Be wise. He's advocating for wisdom. But it's not going to answer all the questions that you have, and that's partly what frustrates Koheleth. It's good, but it's not enough. He's still searching. He also says that the protection of wisdom can protect you from doing and acting in foolish ways, saying foolish and harmful things. Be wise, be silent, be patient, listen, wait. You don't need to speak about everything. That is a protection. It's as good as the protection of money. Wisdom can be a great advantage and gives life to the one who possesses it. So this is wisdom literature. This is why Ecclesiastes is part of the Job, Proverbs collection, including in the Apocrypha, Sirach and the Wisdom of Solomon. It's all wisdom books. And some of them say the very same things as the others do. There's commonalities across all the wisdom books. Consider that, and then verse 13 is interesting. I find it interesting because it seems to reflect the author's perspective on how God relates to the search for meaning. And he seems to think, the author seems to think that certain things are fixed. That is, you can't change them. Who can make straight what God has made crooked? Consider the work of God. Now, this author, like the author of the Psalms, the multiple authors of the Psalms, tend to attribute everything that happens to God, the good and the bad, in a way that probably we would not today. We would not say that everything that happens is directly caused by God. We know that human agency plays a big role. And our author here at the end of this passage, in the very last verse, makes room for human agency, human will, as causing problems to the good world that God has made. And this verse tends to say, look at all the work of God. If he has made something crooked, you're not going to be able to straighten it out. can you make straight? Who can make straight what God has made crooked? We're not sure exactly what he's referring to. What would he list as crooked things God has made? It wouldn't be evil, I think. He wouldn't say God has made things evil and you can't make them good if you wanted to. He's probably talking about things you can't figure out, that seem complex, complicated, difficult, and sometimes cannot be easily sorted out by the human mind. He might also mean things like that good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, and why does God let that happen? It seems like that's something crooked that you can't straighten out. He gets into that in the verses 15 through 18. But let's look first at 14. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. That's easy, right? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. You can be happy when things go well and you're prosperous and things turn out the way you want to. But in the day of adversity, he says, consider this, that God made both those days. He made the day of prosperity and the day of adversity, and there is something to learn from the day of adversity. Like we said at the beginning of this chapter, that there's something to be learned from the day of death and from the house of mourning that can't be learned in the house of feasting. So he says, in the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider God has made both of these days. He'd made one as well as the other. But he despairs of us as humans finding out how everything will turn out. We simply can't know that. Mortals will not find out anything that will come after them. I think he means that you can't always know the outcome. We're going to die before we know the outcome of everything that happens that we have been a part of. Our church is struggling. We have few members, but we are mighty when it comes to outreach. We are making a difference in our community. We tithe 10% of all the money that we receive, and it goes to help other organizations in our community. We're always trying to do something for the neighborhood that we live in, for the elementary school that's close by, for the homeless shelter that used to have a place in our church but now found a building, and we're still helping them with meals and donations and other things that they need. Today I delivered pancake mix and syrup to a house for homeless teenagers that we have here in our community called Ryan's House. We had a big pancake supper just before Lent, right? Shrove Tuesday. And we've had all this pancake mix sitting there in the kitchen. It's still good. There's a lot of it and two big jugs of syrup. And we thought, we're not going to have another pancake supper for quite a while, but somebody should be using this. So we decided yesterday that since I drive right by this shelter for homeless young people, that I could drop it off there, and I did that on my way back home from the Monday study group meeting today. They were very glad to get it and very thankful for it. And it obviously is a good thing. So this is partly what our author is saying. Our church is struggling. We can't know. I will die before I see the outcome of whether our church thrives and grows and survives, or or will it have to merge with another church? We can't know. So many elementary schools in rural areas have had to merge with other school districts in order to be able to financially support the education of the children in their area. And you have lost something in that merger in order to provide something that's necessary. How will that all turn out? Well, we can't know. Mortals may not be able to find out anything, he says, that comes after them. We simply have to do what we can and trust the outcome to God, although I'm not sure he's saying that part here. He's saying God's made both the day of prosperity and the day of adversity, and who knows how everything will turn out. It seems that's more the spirit, at least as I read it. You always can feel free to disagree with me and read it differently. So we now get in verse 15 and following a theme that we have heard about before in Ecclesiastes. In my vain life. And remember, he starts with vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity. You see, even his own life, he thinks, is so far as he's not been able to find what he's looking for. His life seems to him vain. He can't find the meaning of it. In my vain life, I have seen everything. Remember early on, he tried to test everything to see if something was ultimately meaningful, and discovered as a result of those tests that everything was vanity. So that's where he begins verse 15. In my vain life I have seen everything. And here's some examples of things he doesn't like that he has seen. There are righteous people who die in their righteousness. They die too soon. But there are wicked people who prolong their life in evil doing. If God is in charge of things, why does that happen? Why is it that good people die too soon and bad people just keep on doing bad things and seem to prosper and succeed? You might be asking that about our life in our country right now. Maybe you're not. Don't be too righteous, he says. I like this next section. Don't be too righteous or too wise. Being too righteous or too wise, you could humble yourself, you could destroy yourself, you could get yourself pretty confused if you tried to be holier than other people and smarter than other people. It won't lead to the day of prosperity. It will lead to your destruction that you yourself have caused because you tried to be holier than other people, too righteous or too smart. We've all known people in our lives who thought they had the answer to everything and had somehow a need to prove that they were smarter than everybody else in the room. That's a problem. And maybe the people who act that way are not aware of it. Also, he says, don't be too wicked. Well, we'd probably say don't be wicked at all, but he says, don't be too evil. Don't be too foolish. Don't be a fool. This will lead to you dying before your time. You could be so reckless in your evil doing and so foolish in how you use the good life that you've been given that you would die before your time. Then he says there's a balance to be struck here, and I'm wondering what the balance is. Look at verse 18. It's better that you should take hold of the one without letting go of the other. Well, what is the one and the other? A little wisdom and a little foolishness? That doesn't seem right. Maybe a little righteousness and a little wisdom, rather than being too righteous or too wise. Some of both. Take hold of one without letting go of the other. And if you fear God, that will lead to success with regard to both. I can't see the author advocating foolishness or wickedness, so I don't see those as one or the other. But think about that. What is it that he is saying you should take hold of, both one and the other? What are those two things? I'm reading them as wisdom and righteousness or good conduct, but not to the extreme of one or the other. Well, not exactly sure what he's referring to in verse 18. Wisdom, verse 19, gives strength to the wise more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Wisdom is to be preferred. It is better than 10 people, leaders who are trying to run a city and be in conflict with each other. But he says next that there is this to be observed about even the righteous and the wise. Surely there is no one on earth so righteous as to do good without ever sinning. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. We all sin, and as the Psalm, I think it's Psalm 14, isn't it, that there is none who does righteous, no, not one. Our author knows that even the person who goes to an extreme of good conduct and always tries to do the right thing and compares himself or herself to other people, even those persons have clay feet. Even those persons cannot live their whole life without sinning. We all sin. We all need grace, mercy, and forgiveness, and we need the continual call to repentance. So he wisely says, don't listen to everything everyone says. Boy, if he knew about social media today, he would really repeat this often. Don't listen to everything people say on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, X, all of the different social media posts. It's probably best to avoid that altogether insofar as possible. I try to post on Facebook maybe once a month and only post something that I found that seems to be helpful or uplifting. I try to avoid political comments and social comments about uh, my disagreements with how other people believe or think or live. Um, but our author is saying, stop listening to everything you hear. You might even hear your servant cursing you, and you would not like that, but you might forget that you yourself many times have cursed other people. Exercise some humility here and avoid this senseless chatter, and don't believe everything you hear if people say something negative about people in your family or people who are your friends. Just be patient and take it with a grain of salt. So he's tested everything by wisdom. He said, I will be wise, but it's far from me. I haven't been able, even by wisdom, to figure out what is truly wise, what is truly the best way to live. It's so far off. It's so very, very deep. Who can find it out? He says in verse 24. I turn my mind to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the sum of things. That is how it all adds up, to the sum of things, and to know that wickedness is folly and that foolishness is madness. He's found that out. He's also found that wisdom is better. He warns in verse 26, he warns about the foolish woman, just as it does in Proverbs chapter 9, warning about the foolish woman who is a trap. Of course, foolish men are also a trap, although our author focuses here in the classical way of identifying the foolish woman as a trap for men. Again, this is a male writer writing mostly for men, so he's warning against the adulterous woman very much as in the book of Proverbs it does. It's a kind of theme that's in the wisdom literature. But he says in verse 27, see, this is what I found, says the teacher, trying to add everything up, to come to the sum of it, to see how everything adds up, and he wasn't able to find it, which my mind sought to do this, to add everything up and to figure it out and to come to some kind of conclusion, but I have not found that what I was looking for. He says, 1 man in 1,000 I have found. Does that mean 1 man in 1,000 who is righteous? 1 man in 1,000 who is wise? We're not sure exactly who this 1 man is, but he says, a woman among all these I have not found. So it might just be a misogynist comment that you can find 1 wise or good person in 1,000, but you're not going to find a wise or good woman in 1,000. I don't read it that way. That's not what I think he's saying. It could just be that you're not likely to find a woman who is as wise as a man. Actually, my experience is quite the opposite. Most of the really wise people I know in my life are women, including my wife, and much wiser than the men I have known. There's a kind of settled wisdom in the wisdom in the women in our church, for example, that some of us men don't seem to have. They often have a wiser word or a different approach to something that is better. But again, that's in my experience. It may not be the experience of this writer. But who is the one woman he has not found? What if that one woman is wisdom herself? Chokhmah, the Hebrew word for wisdom, is feminine. And if you read Proverbs chapter 9, there is the wise woman who calls out in the street to people to come into her tent, and there is the adulterous woman who calls for people to come into her tent. So they're wise and foolish women. Maybe the woman he hasn't found is wisdom herself. See, this alone I found, that God made human beings straightforward. God made human beings good, direct. God saw all that God had made, and behold, it was very good. But we screwed up. But they have devised many schemes. So what God made good, we human beings, by the exercise of our so-called free will, have messed things up and made it difficult to find that which is truly meaningful and wise. All right, chapter 7 is over. So is my time. Sorry to take a little longer time today to get through chapter 6, but I wanted to highlight what we talked about in our discussion today. Thanks for being part of the Monday Study Group. I do want to tell you that, and I'll say this in writing to you all, there will be no meeting next week, and there will be no video next week. Michelle and I are on vacation for a week, and so I will not be meeting with the Monday Study Group in person next Monday, and I will not be making a video next Monday. But the next video will come on, what, the 29th, 2 weeks from today. I'll send out another video. In the meantime, I will send out study questions, probably tomorrow, on chapter 8, and you'll have 2 weeks then to work on those and to study and think about what Koheleth, Ecclesiastes, is teaching us in chapter 8. Again, thank you for being part of the Monday Study Group. See you in 2 weeks.